guys, welcome to my channel, and as you know, I like to get straight into it. So without wasting any more time, today's video is going to be on if statements. So what are if statements? If statements are essentially in the name, right? So it's a way to create logic based on events. If the number in a cell is an even number, apply the color blue. Or if a number is an odd number, multiply it by 4. So essentially what we're doing is defining a use case or a logic. They are usually referred to as nested if statements. So essentially it's a way to make complex conditional tests on your data. So yeah, so I think the best way to actually learn is by examples. For this use case, I've actually prepared an example for you. You're probably here because either you've heard about if statements or someone's recommended you to use an if statement to solve a problem that you have. And the great thing about if statements is they can be applied to a variety of use cases, whether it's some coursework you have or a project, or even in your everyday sort of expenses or your everyday planning or your everyday life. There is always a use case for if statements. It's essentially conditional logic. So for this particular use case, I prepared an example. I'm just going to go ahead and close that. So essentially the example here, or the use case here, is a company wants to calculate the year-end bonus for its employees based on their annual sales achievement. The bonus structure is as follows. So essentially, this is just a way for us to, you know, calculate a bonus that every colleague or every employee is entitled to based on the sales they've achieved for that year. So it's a fairly straightforward one. So yeah, we would just start defining the data. So if we said, for example, let's name this employee name, and the next column can be achieved sales in pounds. Why not? And then we will say achieved bonus in pounds again. I'll just tidy this up because I don't like when the cells overlap. Tidy that up again. Tidy that one up again. All right. Let's just go ahead and bold these. Based on a set of data, so being the sales figures, we are basically going to define a logic, or we're going to define some conditions that will tell us how much bonus the employees are entitled to based on their sales achievements for the year. We can just go ahead and get a list of random names. I think I actually had some saved somewhere. Let me see if I can grab that. I think I've got some names saved. Okay, there we go. All right. So we've got a few names here, and we're essentially just going to. So based on our example, so we want a use case where any sales above 100,000 means they get 5,000 bonus. Any sales between 75,000 and 100,000, they get 2,500 bonus. Any sales between 50,000 and 75,000, they get bonus of 1,000, and anything below 50,000, they get no bonus. So what we want to do is we want to click into the cell where we want our results to be populated. So in this case, we're trying to calculate the bonuses. So we can click into this cell. So we're going to go ahead and start defining our formula. The great thing about Excel is that it understands what you're trying to achieve and it gives you suggestions. So if statements would always typically start with an equal sign. So equal if, and as you can see, Excel's already suggested the if function. So if we click on that, we want to say that if the figure that's in here, so in this case, column B, row 2. So if B2, and as you can see, as I type that in, it highlights it in blue and it recognizes what cell we're referring to. So if B2, and let's refer back to our use case. So here it's if any cells above 100,000 gets a bonus of 5,000. So if cell B2, let's go back in there. So typically we need to click back in there. If cell B2 is greater than 100,000, so what we always want to remember is the comma denotes the result. So for example, if we want anything above 100,000 to equals 5,000, we would put the 5,000 after the 100,000. So in this case, what we're saying is what this means is if the value of B2 is greater than 100,000, equal it to 5,000, or the result in the cell should be equals 5,000. So what we're saying here again is if cell B2 is over 100,000, C2 should equal 5,000. So that's the first line. And then what we want to go ahead and do is essentially just repeat that in the sequence. What we want to go ahead and do is repeat that in the sequence of our use case. So as we said, 100,000 cells above 100,000 equals 5,000. So I want to go ahead and click into that. Remember, we don't want to close the bracket yet. Just remember that. So we've defined the first one, and then we don't also want to say so after our result we want to place in another comma, and we want to go ahead and say if again suggestions come up 75,000, if the cells are between 75,000 100,000 equals 2,500. So how we'll define that is again if C2 is greater than or equals to 75,000, if C2 is greater than or equals to 75,000, the result should be 2,500. So again, because the range is between 75,000 and 100,000, we already defined what happens when it's over 100,000. So what we're trying to say is if the value is greater than, which means is greater than 75,000 or equals 75,000, the value should be 2,500. And so we just carry on in the same vein. So the next line we want to write is if, again, suggestion is greater than or equals to if, sorry, we made a mistake somewhere here. We haven't actually defined what cell we're referring to. So again, B2. So if B2 is greater than, so again, um, this is great because you can see we're sort of working through this together. I'd probably be a lot quicker if I was just sort of defining these formulas, but I think it's good for us to understand that we'd always need to sort of check over formulas and just make sure that we are defining them and they are performing the actions that we want them to. So here we want to make sure that we include what cell we're referring to. So B2, and make sure it's greater than and equals 50,000, make it 1,000. And so, yeah, so we've defined the first three, and then we just want to make sure that what we want to do here is we've accounted for all the values from 50,000 and above. So what we want to define here is 100,000. So what we can just say is everything else less than 50,000 should be zero, and that would just be us saying anything other than anything that doesn't meet these values will be equal zero. Again, if B2 is greater than 100,000, it should result in 5,000. If B2 is greater than or equals to 75,000, it should result in 2,500. If B2 is greater than or equals to 50,000, it should resolve in 1,000. Otherwise, it should be zero. So the comma is basically proceeding to the next step or the next phase, and you see why that's important as we look at more complex ones. So what we now want to do is go ahead and close all the brackets. So if you can notice, there should be 3 brackets. So this is the first bracket, close it. Second bracket, close. Third bracket, close. And we just want to enter. And you would see that if I go ahead and typing 120,000, for example, here, 5,000 is the bonus as defined. And we can just test this with random numbers now. Actually, what we want to go ahead and do now is we want to apply this formula to all the cells. So if you go ahead and just drag this that small square at the corner, and that applies it to all the other cells. So you would see now that if we go ahead and type in the different formulas, we should be getting the values that we desire. So yeah, as you can see, our formula is in full swing and is working as it should. 80,000, let's try just to see the other values. So we've tested 1,000, 50, 20, 2,500 and 5,000. Just go ahead and fill that out. So again, it's a really simple way to apply logic and just make sure that, you know, we can automate this and we don't have to go based on, again, this is a very basic example. Imagine the power of what we can do and the kind of automation we can do in terms of calculating these fields. Yeah, so that's for a basic if statement. If we want to be a little bit clever, we can also add other functions, and we can go into more details in some of these, probably not for this video, but I'll give you a snippet of what I mean. So if we go back to our formula box, we click into it, let's say we want to create an error message. So let's say, for example, if you enter anything that's not a number in the cells, we can get an error, and we can do this using an isNumber function. So I'll show you how that works. So if we start with our if statement and we go, let's go ahead and say, again, our equal sign, and our if statement, and there's something called an isNumber function. As you can see, there are loads of functions. Excel's really powerful. So if B2 is the cell we're using, and we close that and a bracket. That should be fine. We don't need the equal sign here again. So what we're saying is, so you can go ahead and add that function in, and what we can do is say we need to define what happens if it's not a number. So we can just say, we can add text. So I'll just put text error enter valid sales amount, and we want to close that bracket. All right. So let's quickly review that. So what have I done? What have I added to it? I've basically added an is number function to sit in front of um our initially defined function. So what we're saying is, remember the comma is almost like a OK or an enter or proceed. So we've already defined this. So we're saying if B2 is greater than 100,000, proceed and turn a result of 5,000, and then proceed if, and so on and so forth. So what we just put is, first of all, we're checking for is if B2 is a number. So if B2 is a number, proceed, so which is the comma, and apply the rest of the logic. But if the if function is run, which is the is number function, and it returns a no, it won't proceed to calculate the rest of it. It will just refer to what we have outside of our initial bracket or outside of our bracket of functions, which bundles or groups together the events if it's a number. So if the logic is false, um, then it would return the error number. And as you practice more, this becomes easier to understand. Um, so yeah, we can go ahead and test that. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions on this. I can go into more details or make specific videos and explaining or sort of maybe talking about the best way to understand it better. So we can just think about the commas as a proceed to the next action. So again, the first condition is checked, and if it's true, it carries on. If it's false, it returns what we have outside of the bundled functions. So we can test this. So if we entered, let's say, cat, uh, so what we can do is, so what we want to do is make sure that we reapply this again to all of it. And yep, that's why it wasn't working there for a second. Um, Again, really important that if we make changes, we need to drag all the way through. So as we can see, we can just use a cat, and if we change that to tree, and if we change that number, we can see. So again, this is just the way that we've made it a little bit smarter, and we've been able to sort of apply that logic into the bonus fields. Okay, let's make this more interesting. So I've got another use case which I'd like to go through with you guys. And it's a little bit more complex, but the great thing about this, it would show you how to use and combine if statements with other functions. So this is a use case which I've prepared. So this is a bank credit card approval system. So the use case here is a bank has an automated credit approval system where they decide whether to approve or deny a credit card application. Credit worthiness, another is the annual income, employment status, existing debt, and number of open accounts. And the conditions for the approval are the credit score needs to be above 650, the annual income needs to be above 30,000. So these are the primary criteria. So these two have to be true to proceed to the next or the secondary criteria. So as you can see, secondary criteria, let's just bold this, only applies if the primary criteria is met. So then if the employment state is unemployed, decline. If the existing debt is more than 50% of the annual income, decline. If the number of open credit accounts if the number of open credit accounts is more than 5, put the application on hold for manual review. All right, let's get into it. So if we go back in our Excel sheet, so um, let's define this. Let's say employee name, What the parameters do we need? So the credit score, annual income, so employee name. All right. So let's just use the same names. All right. So we can start by saying, um, and of course, how can we miss the all important field? Uh, and approve or decline. Yeah, so ultimately, this is the field that we want to um, really drill down on, or this is the field where we want to define our formulas. This is the outcome. So there are some things that are really important when we define or when we start to think about defining our formulas. Essentially, we want to think like an architect and we want to plan ahead. Um, and I've put down a list of things to think about um, and the importance of it. If you want me to share this with you, please let me know in the comments. And these are some points that I think are very valuable in terms of deciding, how we want to structure our if statements. Because essentially, most of us have done some level of math in school, and there's always more than one way to the answer, or more than one way to arrive at your solution. It's kind of similar with if statements. There will be more than one way to arrive at desired outcomes, but we need to think about what's the most efficient way to get there. So we know that the primary criteria to even get approved or to even be considered is to have the credit above 650 and the annual income above 30,000. We know without these two conditions, the applicant will be automatically declined if any of these two conditions are not met. So we want to make those our primary conditions. So what we want to do is we want to go in there as we saw in the first instance. We want to start by saying equals and we want to say if. And because there are two criteria to be met, so what we can do here is use what we call an and statement. And statement again is in the name. So if statement is just saying if this happens, apply this, or if this happens, or if this is true, do this. If this is false, do that. And is basically saying both. If A and B equals this, do that. If A and B equals this, do the opposite, or however you want to define it. So in this case, we're going to use the and you can see returns true if all arguments are true. Simple as. So here we want to say if credit score, which is our, let's say, B17, um, so B being the column and 17 being the row. So if B17 is greater than 650 and C17 is greater than 30,000, if B17 is greater than 650 and C17 is greater than 30,000, proceed, comma, all result in as we've defined previously. So if we go ahead and go to the next condition, which is if employment status is unemployed, decline. So we want to say if, um, and now we will use the or statement, and I'll explain that in a second. So if or um, D17, if D17 equals to unemployed, don't worry if you're a bit confused, I will explain this in a second. Just want to get it written down and let's say the existing debt. The other criteria we need to define is the existing debt. Um, so if it is more than 50%, so we can denote that by saying E17 is greater than 0.5 times um, annual income, which is C17. C17. And then we want to go ahead and close our bracket. So let's look at what we've defined so far. So we've said if B17 and C17, so the credit score and annual income, is over 650 and 30,000 respectively, proceed. So remember the comma always denotes proceed or go to the next action. So remember these two have to um, be satisfied successfully. They cannot be false for you to proceed to the next action. So once those two have been checked, if it's okay, we then go ahead and check. And this is where we now use the or statement. So here we use and because we needed these two to be satisfied. Here um we need one or the other. So essentially, if any of them fail, then it has to be declined. So we need to make sure that the secondary check is to check whether if D17 spotted something here. We want to check that if D17 is unemployed, or if the debt is over half of the annual income, automatically decline. So we'll say go ahead and say decline, and then we will go ahead and say if F17 is greater than 5, refer for manual review. And again, I just want to get this out, and then I'll go back and explain it again for you. Otherwise, approve. Um, and what we want to do is round it off to say, just to make sure that if anything else outside of this outcome, make sure we decline. Okay, I think we are about right, but let's go over it now. So again, we have a look at what our criteria is. So we have primary set of criteria, and then we have the secondary set of criteria if the primary set of criteria is met. So let's go ahead and say, so we're saying if the credit score and annual income is over 650 and 30,000 respectively, proceed to the next condition. And the next condition is we're saying if employment status unemployed or existing debt is over half of the annual income, decline. So remember, the comma is after the comma is the result. So um, at this point, we would have checked through to see that all the criteria would have been successful. Hence, we move forward. So if number of existing accounts is over 5, go for manual review. Otherwise, so if these are all satisfied successfully, approve. Otherwise, if any of the first two in the primary conditions are not met, decline. So again, what we're saying here is if the credit score and the annual income are satisfied, go ahead and check if the employment status is unemployed, or if the existing debt is um, over half of the annual income. So if any of these are detected, the next step it will be declined, and then after that we proceed to say that if F17 is greater than 5, go for manual review. Otherwise, if none of these are true, approve. And the decline here, this points directly to the initial if statement, because remember, we're proceeding after the comma is assuming that the initial criteria is true. If the initial criteria is not true, we need to decline. Hence why we've defined the decline outside of the um, bracket here. And remember, the good thing with Excel is if there are discrepancies, you will get errors. As you can see, there is an error there, and you can go ahead and figure out, where your mistake lies. So we can go ahead and put our brackets back. So let's test this out. So if we say our credit score is 700, and the annual income is 40,000. So again, that's met the first two. Um, is automatically an approval. But we see if we have unemployed, it automatically declines. However, as long as we've defined the first two, we're okay to approve. Now, ideally, this is, we could argue that we want to add the same sort of logic as we've done to in the previous example, where we maybe account for blank, and there is a is blank function. If you'd like me to share with you a cheat sheet with as many Excel functions explaining them as possible, please let me know in the comments, and I will share a free Google Doc with all of you. So, I mean, let's say you've got 7 open credit accounts. You can see it's going to go for manual review. If existing debt is, let's say, 60,000, obviously that's an automatic decline. So as you can see, this is a more complex system, and we can get a really clever with what we can do with the if functions. As you can see in this example, we've combined if functions, all functions, and functions to get this formula, which can help a bank or a banking system to essentially approve or decline credit applications. I think as you practice and as you do more use cases, you'd get really familiar with this. You can start with the more basic ones, like the first example, and then you work your way up into the more complex ones. Let me know if there's any use cases you have. It might be from school, it might be from work, or any use case you have. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make a video on that as well. Alright, as always, it's been good sharing my knowledge and nuggets with you. If there's any um, use cases or any topics you want me to cover, please let me know. And until next time.